was the weekend time for a solo camping trip to the Appalachian Trail, as my girlfriend was away with her friends for 2 weeks, and I had some free time. So, I packed my bags and rode my bike out to find some peace in nature. Riding a bike in the early morning, feeling the air slap against me, was always therapeutic. I rode as fast as I could to feel that adrenaline rush that had been missing in my life for the past few days. Instead of stopping at an inn for coffee and a dim breakfast, I just rode, focusing on the road and soaking in the experience I craved. Because of that, I arrived earlier than I had expected. When I reached my destination, I stepped away from the bike and yelled out loud, hoping to hear an echo. The sound brought instant joy to my face, making me feel energized enough to set up camp and prepare coffee for myself. Taking my Stanley cup with me, I walked further into the woods, not too far, but far enough to explore the area. I found a lake full of frogs, surrounded by trees everywhere. As the sky started to dim and my coffee was finished, I turned back toward my tent, picking some leaves along the way to use for dinner. Back at my tent, I sat down to watch the sunset, observing as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. The colors shifted as darkness fell, the light blues turning to deep navy while the stars took the sun's place. I got up to set up a campfire and took out my barbecue gear to prepare dinner. Unlike others, I'm not a fan of chicken, so I just roasted vegetables and sat by the fire, watching the flames dance in the darkness as I savored the tranquility of my surroundings. It was just me, the crackling fire, and the soft whisper of the wind through the trees. When I finished my food, I took out my guitar and played some music I'd written years ago. For me, music is the best way to fill any void and find yourself amid the crowd. I played my favorite tunes while gazing at the moon. When my fingers started aching, I put the guitar away and went into my tent, grateful for the warmth of my sleeping bag. I could hear distant owl hoots and the rustling of critters in the underbrush, comforting sounds that lulled me into a peaceful slumber. I drifted off, wrapped in the soothing sounds of nature. I was in a deep, fearless sleep until around 4 a.m., when a loud howl outside my tent startled me awake. It sounded like a pack of wolves was near my campsite, howling loudly. My heart was pounding, and the hair on my arms stood up as goosebumps spread across my skin. For a moment, I was stunned and puzzled, unsure if it was real, a dream or a scene from a movie playing in my head. Fear, anxiety, and tension all took a toll on me, but I stayed silent, not daring to move an inch. I calmed myself, reminding myself that wild animals were part of the experience. I held my breath, listening intently, hoping it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. A moment later, I heard the howling again. Panic crept into my mind as I realized that whatever was outside wasn't leaving. I sat up slowly, moving closer to the tent's entrance on the side farthest from the noise, and carefully reached into my bag for the pocket knife I always carried. Crawling to exit the tent, I slipped my wallet and phone into my pockets. My heart sank when I felt a heavy hand grip my foot through the thin fabric of my tent. A primal scream erupted from my throat as adrenaline surged through my body. I lunged toward the intruder, slashing wildly with my pocket knife, feeling it connect with something soft. Fear and determination surged through me as the fight-or-flight response kicked in. The intruder recoiled, letting out a grunt of pain before stumbling back and fleeing into the darkness. I could hear footsteps retreating into the woods as my breath came in ragged gasps. I lay in my torn tent, stunned and gasping, trying to process what had just happened. "Phone," my mind echoed. Ignoring the pain, I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and dialed 911 with shaking hands. "I need help," I cried, my voice a mix of fear and urgency. "Someone tried to break into my tent." The operator's calm voice helped ground me, reassuring me that help was on the way. But every minute felt like an hour as I waited, listening for any sign of the intruder's return. The night was eerily quiet now, The usual forest sounds replaced by the thumping of my own heartbeat. I shined my flashlight around the campsite, half expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows. Finally, the distant sound of sirens pierced the stillness. Flashing lights broke through the darkness, illuminating the trees around me. Relief washed over me as I crawled out of the tent, still clutching my knife, scanning for any sign of danger. The police arrived quickly, sweeping the area with their flashlights as they assessed the scene. I recounted the terrifying encounter to them, my voice trembling as I relived it. They listened intently, taking notes and asking questions. "Did you see the person?" one of the officers asked. "No, I only felt their hand. I didn't get a good look at their face," I replied, my voice shaky. As they searched the area, one officer stopped and knelt near some bushes. "We found something," he called out, his tone serious. I walked over, my heart pounding as I saw what he was examining. On the ground was a small bottle filled with a clear liquid, the label partially obscured by dirt. The officer picked it up carefully, his expression grave. "This looks like it could be a chemical agent," he said, glancing at me. "Something that could incapacitate a person." A chill ran down my spine as I processed the implication. This wasn't a random encounter, it was something far more sinister. A wave of nausea hit me as I realized how close I'd come to something truly horrifying. The officers collected the evidence and assured me they would do everything they could to track down the person responsible. They advised me to stay put until they secured the area, but all I wanted was to leave. At dawn, I packed my gear with trembling hands, each sound jolting me with renewed fear. The woods, once my sanctuary, now felt like a trap, a place hiding malevolent intentions. With officers keeping watch, I loaded my car, feeling their concern mirrored in my own expression. Finally, I climbed into my car, locked the doors, and drove away. As I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone lurking among the trees, I knew my love for the woods had been tainted by the night's terror. I vowed never to return to that spot. While the experience left me shaken, it ignited a determination to never let fear keep me from living fully. The woods could be wild and unpredictable, but I was stronger than the shadows that had tried to consume me. Sudden plans are the best, at least. That's what I used to think before what we faced that night. It all started with my husband's excited mood and our bored children who, out of nowhere on a Friday night, proposed a camping weekend and ran to me with the idea. Feeling relaxed and spontaneous, I said, "Okay," and the next day we set out in our car for an unexpected adventure. Within an hour, my kids, Lily and Sam, were asleep, while I enjoyed my book and Mark, my husband, drove us along. Unusually, Mark drove slowly, savoring the lush green forest that stretched out on both sides of the road. After about an hour, we arrived at our campsite, which was breathtaking. I hugged him tight in awe, feeling so grateful to have him, our kids, and that beautiful scenery. He gave me a kiss, and then we set about unpacking and pitching our tent in a secluded clearing, surrounded by towering trees. Once the tent was up, we woke the kids, who were initially reluctant but soon excited when they saw the surroundings. They started snapping photos on my phone. As we had chosen not to give them phones yet, being of the old-fashioned mindset, we wanted our kids to explore nature and make their own discoveries rather than relying on screens. And they did, enthusiastically, as they wandered nearby with Mark to gather leaves and fruits. They loved the tall grass and even hiked for a while with him, while I stayed near the camp, basking in the sun, reading, and preparing food. Soon, they returned carrying heaps of pine cones, which I placed inside the tent, then handed them rackets to play. As the sun dipped lower, I set up a campfire to roast vegetables and marshmallows, cook rice, and prepare curry for a filling meal. The best part was that everyone participated in the cooking. My kids roasted marshmallows with Mark, who also helped with chopping veggies and meat and even learned to make rice that night. Watching them help filled me with warmth and a deep contentment. As we started eating, however, the tranquil woods began to feel more eerie. The tall trees loomed above us, their branches swaying in the wind, casting shadows that danced across the ground. We tucked our kids into their sleeping bags, their eyes fluttering closed with exhaustion, while Mark and I sat outside the tent, wrapped in blankets, sipping hot cocoa, and talking about the lovely day and our hopes for the future. It was a beautifully intimate moment, under a starry sky. It was the most memorable night until the strange sounds of the forest gave me a sudden sense of unease. It felt as if something was about to happen, something that could ruin our perfect day. "Maybe we should turn in for the night," I suggested, my voice barely breaking the silence. Mark nodded, his gaze scanning our dimly lit surroundings. Just as we were about to retreat into our tent, I noticed a figure in the distance. At first, I thought it was just the fog playing tricks, but as it drew closer, my heart sank. A woman was paddling a small canoe across a nearby lake, the sound of her oars slicing through the water eerily echoing in the stillness. She appeared to be in her 60s, her skin weathered from countless hours under the sun, and her long gray hair hung loosely around her shoulders. There was an unsettling energy about her that sent chills down my spine. "Mark, do you see that?" I whispered, my voice trembling. He squinted into the darkness, the figure now approaching our campsite with a strange calmness. "Yeah, I see her," he replied, his tone cautious. A wave of panic washed over me. Why was she here, at this hour? And why was she so drawn to our campsite? I clutched Mark's arm, fear for our children surging through me. "We should say something," I urged, my stomach in knots. As the woman drifted closer, I could see her face more clearly. Her eyes, pale and distant, seemed to pierce through the darkness. A primal instinct kicked in, and the protective mother within me surged forward. "Excuse me," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "What are you doing here?" She paused, her canoe now just a few feet from the shore. A strange smile crept across her face, unsettling in its sincerity. "Just passing through," she replied, her voice low and gravelly. "The night is beautiful, isn't it?" Mark stepped forward, his posture rigid. "This is a private campsite. You need to leave," he stated firmly. The woman's smile faded slightly, replaced by a flicker of irritation. "No need to be rude. I'm just enjoying the serenity," she replied, her tone almost mocking. We exchanged worried glances, both of us feeling the tension in the air. "Please, it's late." "You need to go," Mark insisted, more firmly this time. For a moment, she simply stared at us, her expression unreadable. Then, without another word, she turned her canoe and paddled away, disappearing into the mist that blanketed the lake. I felt relieved, grateful we were just a family out here, alone again. But the sense of dread lingered as we hurried into the tent, checking on Lily and Sam, who were blissfully unaware of the encounter. That night, I lay awake, listening to the sounds of the forest. Each rustling leaf or snapping twig set my heart racing. I couldn't shake the feeling that the woman was still watching us, lurking just beyond the trees. My mind raced, replaying her unsettling demeanor and the strange calmness with which she had approached. I was still wide awake in the children's tent when the first light of dawn decorated the sky. As soon as the morning sun began to brighten our tent, I nudged Mark to wake him up. "Let's go home," I said, still anxious, not willing to risk my kid's safety any longer.
He took my hand, pulled me closer, and kissed my cheek.
"Okay," he whispered, getting up. After a quick wash, we packed everything and got our sleepy kids into the car. Mark drove fast, and within 4 hours, we were back in the safety of our home. The kids were still asleep, so I gently placed them in their beds and went to get some sleep myself after a sleepless night. I wasn't sure what Mark did while I slept, but when I woke up at noon and went to the lounge, I only had one thing to say to him: "No more camping." Unlike before, we took our kids, Hannah and James, to the Appalachian Trail for a 2-day adventure. My husband, Karen, sat beside me while I drove because driving in the mountains is always therapeutic for me. It's what brought Karen and me closer as we met in the mountains for the first time. That day, driving felt even more heartwarming. The air was crisp, and the leaves were just beginning to turn, promising a vibrant display of fall colors. I drove fast enough to feel the adrenaline rush, which is why we reached our destination quickly. I followed the map Karen showed me on Google Maps. Meanwhile, we enjoyed our favorite songs in the car, and the kids danced along. Before long, they stepped outside to dance in nature, and of course, we joined them, kneeling down to celebrate the moment as a family. As the children fell over from laughing and dancing, I scooped them up in my arms, tickling them before hugging them tight. We then set up our campsite in a quiet spot, a grassy clearing with a view of a lake in the distance. With a few essentials packed, we set out on a hike. We took selfies and met other campers, sharing laughs and stories. It was a perfect evening where we all felt like explorers. Afterward, we returned to our camp. Karen and the kids built a fire while I got out a pan to cook eggs as they roasted veggies and marshmallows. We had a delicious curry with our favorite drinks under the starry sky. After the meal and some fun, we all nestled into our sleeping bags, feeling satisfied and proud to give such a lovely experience to our kids. The next day, we set out again, venturing into the woods until the trail ended. We finally made it to the lake we'd been longing to reach and went for a swim. The water was so cold it sent chills through me, but it was exhilarating. As the sun started to set, we returned to our tent. I prepared burgers, as Karen had brought buns from a store nearby, and we enjoyed our beautiful night together until around 4 a.m. Eventually, we all fell asleep until a horrifying sound, like someone shouting at the top of their lungs, jolted me awake. My kids woke up too, calling out to me. Karen and I rushed to their tent, holding them tight, trying to reassure them. Just as we started to calm down, we heard the distinct sound of splashing water nearby. Karen told me to stay with Hannah while he went to investigate. I watched his shadow as he crawled out, scanning the surroundings. I could see him pause as he looked toward the lake. He hurried back inside, his face pale. "What happened?" I asked, concerned. "There's a woman with extremely long hair paddling a small canoe on the lake," he said, visibly shaken. "She looks like she's in her 60s, with leathery skin that glistened in the moonlight, and her long gray hair was floating around her like fog." A chill ran down my spine. "What is she doing out there?" I asked, anxiety creeping into my voice. "I don't know," he replied, equally confused. That night, we stayed close to our kids in their tent. None of us could sleep. The eerie howling of the wind, the chirping of wild birds, and the rustling leaves haunted us. None of us could close our eyes, waiting anxiously for the sun to rise so we could leave. Finally, morning arrived, the sunlight breaking through the trees, casting a warm glow over our campsite. I felt relieved, and we eagerly packed up to head home. On the way, we stopped at a nearby inn for breakfast, feeling a bit more relaxed. While eating our toast, we noticed a group of campers laughing nearby. Feeling an urge to share our experience, I approached them. "Are you heading to the trail?" I asked. "Yeah, why do you ask?" One of them, a young guy, replied. "We just came from there." I proceeded to tell them everything that had happened. Their faces turned serious, and one camper, a rugged-looking man, leaned in. "Did she have gray hair and leathery skin?" he asked, his tone somber. "Yes," Karen replied, surprised. "Have you seen her too?" The man nodded. "She's been spotted here for weeks. Last night, she was near our tents, acting aggressively, throwing things at us. We thought she was just strange, but maybe she's more dangerous than we thought." My heart sank. It wasn't just our imagination. There was a real threat in those woods. Karen's grip tightened around my hand as we exchanged a worried look. What we'd thought was a strange encounter had now become something far more unsettling. We quickly said our goodbyes to the other campers, got back in the car, and drove home. As soon as we arrived, we all collapsed onto the sofa, not realizing when we'd fallen asleep. But one thing was certain, we wouldn't be camping at that place ever again. It was Monday, and Sarah and I both took 3 days off from work for a camping trip on the Appalachian Trail. We left our homes around noon, eager for adventure. Sarah drove to pick me up, and then we set off for our dream destination. We were opposites in many ways, but one thing united us, our love for nature and the desire to spend time in it. That's why, as soon as payday arrived, we both planned this camping trip and took the leave. After navigating thick trails and admiring the woods, we arrived at our campsite, which Sarah had picked as a surprise for me. "See, how's it?" She stepped out first, hands on her waist, turning to see my reaction. When I hopped out to check out the spot, I noticed other campers in the distance. "It's awesome," I reply, feeling both reassured by the nearby campers and captivated by the area's beauty. Soon, we set up our tent and built a campfire. I took out hot dogs, buns, and the patties I brought from home, eager to cook a meal for us since we were both starving. Meanwhile, Sarah pulled out some drinks. After eating our fill, we grabbed a few essentials and set off for a hike. We followed the visible trail, aiming to reach the highest peak we could. Along the way, we stopped to chat with other campers and exchange numbers with them, just in case we needed help. After 2 or 3 hours, we returned to our tent by the lake, where we leaned on each other and took in the tranquility. Then, Sarah started talking about her past relationship with Garrett. "You know, I met Garrett here on this trail and we ended things here too. But I still love this place." "Why?" I asked, curious. "It's nature. Nature can absorb your sorrows and give you peace in return." She looked at me and leaned her head back again. I was devastated at the time, but that lake had made me feel safe, like I could find myself here again. She spoke with such sincerity that, even though I didn't fully understand, I couldn't help but listen. "If it's that special, maybe we should take a dip in that lake." We exchanged smiles and jumped into the lake. The water was freezing, and I shouted at the top of my lungs, while Sarah lingered at the edge, arms crossed, trying to control her shivering. It was the perfect moment. We splashed around and swam, feeling alive and connected. By the time the sun began to set, we were content and ready to warm up. We prepared dinner and roasted marshmallows under the dark sky. Sarah pulled out some beers from her bag, and we enjoyed our meal as we stargazed. Everything felt perfect that night, the warmth of the fire wrapping us in comfort. But as darkness fully settled, an unsettling feeling crept in. It started with an odd noise, something that felt out of place in our peaceful haven. I noticed it while finishing the last bite of my meal. Just as we were about to turn in for the night, I caught sight of a figure lurking at the edge of the clearing. He was a tall, lean man in worn clothes that seemed to blend into the shadows. I nudged Sarah, and we both watched as he moved closer, though he didn't approach us directly. There was something unnerving about the way he looked at us, almost like we were being studied. We exchanged uneasy glances, but decided to ignore him and head to bed. Fortunately, the night passed without incident, and we slept soundly. The next morning was beautiful. We made French toast over the fire with coffee, hoping to shake off the eerie memory from the night before. As we set out on a hike in the other direction, I felt a sense of freedom wash over me, but a small part of me remained on edge. As we walked, I noticed the man from the previous night following at a distance along the trail. I glanced at Sarah, who had noticed him too. "Do you think he's following us?" I asked, in a hushed tone. She shrugged, trying to sound casual, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. "Let's keep walking. He might just be heading the same way." Still, I couldn't shake the feeling we were being watched. Every time a branch snapped or the bushes rustled, my heart pounded. So, I pulled out my phone and texted one of the campers, Karen. "Hey, it's Natalia. There's this guy watching us, a lean man. Have you seen him?" While we basked in the sun at the peak, Karen texted back, "Yeah, my girl noticed the same. We were just discussing what to do. You can stay with us tonight if you feel safer." I showed the text to Sarah. "Holy crap," she muttered. Just as we were about to decide our next move, the same man appeared before us, grinning widely in a way that sent chills down my spine. "Nice day for a hike, huh?" he said. "You two are brave to be out here alone." We forced polite smiles, then quickly made our way back to our tent. I texted Karen again. "Please come to our site. That man just approached us, and I'm scared." Luckily, Karen and his friend Mike arrived within 15 minutes. They helped us pack, and we went with them to their campsite. That night, we had fun together, finally feeling safe. The following morning, just after dawn, we left for home, relieved to have avoided what could have been a far more terrifying experience. Camping with school. My friends and I always begged our teachers to organize a camping trip. We even left notes about it in the suggestion box, and finally, it happened. Our school arranged a camping trip near the Appalachian Trail. I couldn't contain my excitement. It was a chance to roam free and be ourselves outside of school with our friends and teachers. Yet, little did I know that this trip would leave an indelible mark on me, one that would forever change my relationship with the wilderness. Led by our teacher, Miss Annie, we set off early one Friday morning. The whole ride, we danced and laughed as the school bus traveled at a steady speed through lanes bordered by towering pine trees. Finally, we arrived. Yay! We cheered, somewhat cautiously, as Miss Annie was watching us. We jumped from our seats, ready to rush out, but she blocked the door, standing like a barrier in our way. "First, listen, then you can go," she announced. She gave us a rundown of the rules and what to expect. "Always stay together. I don't want any of you wandering alone. It can be dangerous out here." "Yes, ma'am," we chanted in unison. She nodded, opened the door, and moved aside, allowing us to exit. She watched us all go out and followed last. As we stepped out, we were in awe. Towering trees surrounded us, and the crisp air filled our lungs, invigorating us for the adventures ahead. "Come on, set up the tents," Miss Annie called out, and we all gathered around to pitch the tents. She led us into the woods, along with Sir James to collect firewood. Together, we set up a campfire. Miss Annie brought out a basket of sports gear, and we spent the day playing games. My friend Ian, who was a great singer, entertained us with songs, and we all joined in, dancing. As the sky began to turn pink and blue with the sunset, Miss Annie called us over to the campfire for an evening of storytelling and marshmallow roasting. Soon, as night fell and the sky turned dark blue, we enjoyed our marshmallows and dinner with stars twinkling overhead. I felt at peace, wishing we could stay there forever. But of course, that wasn't possible. After another round of singing, we all crawled into our tents, having fun until Miss Annie came by each tent, giving us her classic fierce stare to make sure we settled down. Eventually, we fell asleep, only to wake up to a beautiful morning filled with the sounds of birds chirping and the sun filtering through the trees. Everything seemed normal until we noticed police activity nearby. Officers in uniform moved through the woods, their expressions serious. Whispers spread among the students and teachers, and the initial excitement of the trip began to fade. "What do you think is going on?" I asked my classmate, Jenna, who was sitting next to me at breakfast. "I don't know," she replied, brow furrowed. "But it can't be good." The tension in the air grew as the day went on. Our teachers tried to maintain a sense of normalcy, leading us on a hike through the trails, but an unease lingered. Every rustle in the bushes or snap of a twig sent chills down my spine. We were constantly on high alert, glancing back at the police presence whenever we could. I could see the worry in the teachers' faces. They were clearly concerned, trying to shield us from whatever was happening just beyond our campsite. As we returned from our hike, a heavy silence hung over the camp. The police were still there, now speaking with our teachers. I could hear snippets of their conversation, and my heart sank as I caught a few alarming words: missing hikers and murdered. My stomach twisted in knots. The reality of our situation began to sink in. This was no ordinary camping trip. We were in a potentially dangerous area. I muttered a quick prayer, hoping it would help ease my nerves, but it didn't. Miss Annie looked worried too. She approached the police, murmuring something I couldn't hear as I was sitting a bit further away. I did, however, see one of the officers nod at her. Soon after, a few guards arrived and sat with us at the campfire. We had dinner and some fun time together. Miss Annie shared some cool stories, and we all enjoyed the evening. But the guards stayed with us. They ate, danced, and laughed, making the day memorable despite everything. While enjoying, I noticed two men lurking behind a tree, but I felt safe knowing the guards were nearby. At around 11 p.m., Miss Annie's watch alarm went off. "Kids, it's time for bed." Inside, my friends and I whispered about the guards. "Why are they here?" was the question everyone was asking. Rumors and discussions filled the night, and eventually I fell asleep. The next day, we woke to Miss Annie's voice calling us. Her no-nonsense tone made us pack up quickly, as it was time to leave. Within 2 hours, we had eaten, packed up, and were on the bus heading back to school. On the ride home, I was quiet and nervous. That camping trip became a trauma for me for several years, because we had witnessed a real event that day, the murder of hikers. The fear and dread still haunt me, and to this day, I have never gone hiking or camping alone.